This video contains elements that are not suitable for children under the age of 14. Viewer discretion is advised.
Guys, where do you think Zack has gone?
Beats me. He should be here by now to talk about Series 22.
Come to think of it, I think Matt's gone missing as well. Where is he anyway?
Here I am, guys. Sorry I'm late. I just had to deal with something first.
Well, at least you're here now. Where has Matt gotten to?
Oh, right. I killed him and then put his organs up for sale on the black market.
What? Zack, what is
That's
wrong with
messed
you?
up, man.
Got you there, didn't I? Don't worry, you're free. Matt's fine. Earlier I had to detain him.
What do you mean by detain?
Well...
Oh no, please tell me that you didn't. Not again, at least.
Dude, not funny, Zack. And black comedy just makes it worse.
Let me guess. You tied him up and locked him in the closet just so he wouldn't break out into a rage when he gets to forever and ever, all while usually dropping the F-bomb whenever he talks about it. Is that right?
More or less.
You do realize that Matt will eventually force his way out of that closet and charge towards you like a rabid dog, right?
I'm aware of that, but even if that was the case, I made sure the door was reinforced so I don't have to deal with him interrupting me while I'm trying to discuss the show. Seriously, I'm sick of Matt doing so.
I think we all did at some point, Zack. And you never got angry with us for it.
Well, it was mostly Matt, and you usually had a reason for being here, which I accepted, but you get my point.
Do you think we should try and set him free?
Nah, let's just leave him there. I just want to teach him a lesson for sticking his ass where it doesn't belong.
Well, if you say so.
Nearly 5 years and they still hadn't sorted out their rivalry.
I'm gonna help Brandon with his Sonic series now. But I may have something to say about Banjo and the Bushfire a bit later if you'd call me up for that.
Right, now then. Sorry about the delay, folks. Just had to get a certain Canadian ape off my back. But now, I can finally discuss Series 22 of Thomas and Friends. Again. But before I do, don't sell anyone's body parts on the internet because it's illegal and you'll end up in trouble for it. So, 2018, huh? Quite a year, wasn't it? Maybe not as depressing as 2016, but it really had its downer moments, and it dribbled its way into the Thomas fandom, what with the latest set of changes to the show. The latest era of the show was piloted by the 80-minute special Big World Big Adventures, and like the two specials prior, it was divisive among the fandom. However, it was easily the most divisive of the specials released up to this point, with some ranking it even worse than Day of the Diesels, which I really don't get. Even if you didn't like Big World Big Adventures, there are far worse movies out there. We did a whole review on that back in 2019, so you can check that out as well as our thoughts on Series 22 the same year in the links below. Those two reviews were probably some of our best work. Anyway, the rebrand was masterminded by Ian McHugh and Michaela Winter based upon market research conducted by Mattel with audiences around the globe, wondering how to keep Thomas and Friends relevant in a competitive market, and hoping to reverse declining toy sales. One suggestion they took on board was, trains can go places, but Thomas never goes anywhere. If you're expecting us to make some kind of joke about that, sorry, but we never stooped to that level. And that brings us on to Series 22. So where do I start with the changes made? The series reverted to having 26 episodes, but there is now an even split between Sodor stories and non-Sodor stories, 4 episodes each in India and Australia, and 5 in China. I'll get to my thoughts on those in a bit. While they still utilize the 11-minute format including the intro, end credits, and song, the main episodes were reduced once more to 7 minutes. The remainder of the episode consists of a pre-episode introduction before it and a life lesson segment after it. Frankly, they serve no purpose to the episodes. All that introduction segment does is hype up the episode I'm about to watch, even when it doesn't need that boost. The life lesson segment not only hammers in the episode's message to the target audience, but also ends up reminding you of a previous episode from Series 17 to 21. You could cut those segments altogether and the result would be better off for it. For the first time, not every episode ended with the Big World Big Adventures engine roll call. The international episodes ended with Journey Never Ends, and for Series 23, Let's Dream was added at the end of some episodes, as was the Steam Team for Series 24, one of the least creative song titles I've ever seen. This was a change that I thought was a good one since it adds more variety rather than just constantly listening to the same song over and over again. Oh, and as a slight amendment to my Series 19 review, I never applied anything about the revised engine roll call being better than the classic theme song. I was simply saying the revised roll call for Series 19 to 21 was better than the version from Series 8 to 18. Okay? Okay. Good. Okay. On top of those changes, there was a new theme song to celebrate the rebranding of the show, creatively titled Big World Big Adventures, and just as creatively based upon Series 21's Set Friendship in Motion. It doesn't really feel like a theme song to Thomas and Friends at all. When a theme song to a TV show or film series becomes iconic, you end up thinking of the show or film series it was made for. Shows like The Simpsons and SpongeBob and movie franchises like Harry Potter have been going on for over 20 years or more, and if they were to have their theme songs replaced, then they would lose a part of their own identity. In Thomas's case, he lost his most iconic theme in 2004, but even the engine roll call feels more like a part of his identity than the Big World Big Adventures theme song does. For every episode, a fantasy sequence was included, and they're pretty much a double-edged sword. At best, they were fun and entertaining. At worst, they were outright forced and wasted the viewer's time. Probably one of the best uses of the fantasy sequence was in An Engine of Many Colors, in which they serve as nightmare sequences for James following his crash in the fastest red engine on Sodor, thinking that he might be repainted blue, green, or silver, and then crashes once more when he gets carried away with his new paint job. What I like about that episode is that it uses the fantasy sequences to their advantage rather than being tacked on for the sake of filling up 7 minutes. And it was a pretty strong start for new writer Michael White, who would continue to write 7 more episodes over the next 3 series. Believe it or not, I didn't know Michael was a part of the fandom until doing a bit of light research. On YouTube, he's better known as White House Films. Check out his YouTube account in the description below. Speaking of An Engine of Many Colors, if you were to combine it with the fastest red engine on Sodor and a shed for Edward, you would get a mini special out of him which has been given the fan nickname Red Engines and Shed Trouble. I've done a fan edit myself, but unfortunately, I can't post it on YouTube because An Engine of Many Colors has been blocked worldwide by Mattel. Thanks a lot. But I can provide an alternative link in the description below. The penultimate change to the format was Thomas himself serving as the narrator. Like most of the changes made, it came with its own set of pros and cons. On the positive side, since Thomas is on his worldwide adventures, it makes sense for him to tell it to the audience. It's his story, so naturally we want to hear it from his point of view. But on the negative side, and this mostly concerns the Sodor stories, Thomas being the narrator means that he's more shoehorned than he already was. Why can't we hear stories being told from another engine's point of view? If you want to have the Sodor stories told from the perspective of someone, why not have it be Sir Topham Hatt, and the segments before and after the episodes could have him establish the main story and recap the lesson, respectively. It would have felt reminiscent of Danny Doherty introducing the Theodore Tugboat stories, and those segments would have actually had a purpose rather than just being there to fill up the runtime. Plus, Keith Wickham had voiced Sir Topham Hatt in both English dubs since The Adventure Begins. He'd done so from the get-go in the British dub, and that would have saved a bit of time and money in the recording studio. Sounds like a lost opportunity there if you ask me. And of course, there's the revised Steam Team, but I'll come to that in a bit. For now, I'll delve into the international half of Series 22. Making their first appearances in the show proper are Yongbao from China, Ashima and Rajiv from India, and Shane from Australia. I'll try to make my reviews on each of them as brief as I can to avoid the risk of this review going on for too long. Yongbao is my favorite of the 4 of them, and I really like seeing him interact with Thomas, especially in Series 23 and 24. It really feels like there's a bond between them, something I never felt with Hiro. There, I said it. Shane is a lot of fun too with his hammy, laid-back personality, and it helped that his voice actor, Shane Jacobson, is a comedian. Rajiv is India's equivalent to James, and he's a lot of fun to watch whenever he's on screen. Between him and Yongbao, I'm glad they didn't have speaking roles in The Great Race, because if they had, they probably would have had voices that would come off as offensive, and The Simpsons got into hot water in 2017 over its character Apu Nahasapima Petalam being considered a quote-unquote negative stereotype. And Big World Big Adventures was in development around that time as well.
Coincidence? I think not!
Finally, there's Ashima, and I'm gonna say it, I never cared for her at all. Her role in The Great Race was absolutely redundant, just to teach Thomas a lesson about being himself that he should know by now. We already got that with Gator and Percy in Tale of the Brave, so why bother retreading what already worked? And that's not even getting into how many fans ship them together. Look, I respect your opinion if you like shipping them together, but I'm sorry, Ashima and Thomas would never work out as a couple in my eyes, even if you were to somehow work around the fact that it's a long-distance relationship. You know what that reminds me of? Flash Sentry and Sunset Shimmer in Legend of Everfree, in which the female is the worst possible candidate for a love interest to a male, and there's a ton of evidence proving why it would never work. I'd rather see Thomas end up with Rosie, and I'll come to that episode soon enough. Even though Ashima felt more like a character in series 23 and 24 rather than Miss Exposition, she's never been one of my top favorites. As for the other international newbies, if Mattel wanted to enforce some girl power into the series, then they could have done more of who was introduced in series 22. I mean, Hongmei, Tabika, Ayla, Noor Jahan didn't have a whole lot in terms of personality, and even then, they're not very interesting. It was nice that the Indian Railway had a female controller with Charubala, but even with that, it makes you wonder why Sodor doesn't bother bringing in female railway workers with a few exceptions, like Nia's driver. The only other international character to leave some form of an impact was Shankar the Indian Diesel. His no-nonsense personality contrasts with Rajiv's arrogance and vanity really well, and Shankar really shines whenever he turns up, even getting his own episode in Series 24. In general, the international episodes are a mixed bag to me. Series 22 did have its highlights like Tiger Trouble, Thomas and the Dragon, and Kangaroo Christmas, but then it also had more middling episodes like Number One Engine and Trusty Trunky, and really boring episodes like Thomas in the Wild and Thomas in the Monkey Palace. But for me, the worst international episode has always been Thomas Goes to Bollywood, as it practically represents the worst habits of the international stories for Series 22, putting more emphasis on culture rather than telling a story, Thomas and other characters barely displaying any personality, and a world that's just pulled out of the ass. But what makes it even worse to me is the ending, where Thomas nearly put the actor in danger, being he gets praised for his impromptu rescue because we have to end the episode somehow. The actor could have gotten severely injured, possibly even killed due to Thomas's recklessness, and the tank engine gets no repercussions for it. This is that moment from Wonky Whistle, but far worse. I hated Thomas Goes to Bollywood when it first came out, and I still hate it now. If you like it, then good for you. Just don't give me any grief over not liking something you do. I've been through enough of that with Sodorama as it is. Well, that's going to do it for the international side of things. I don't think there's a lot more I could say that I haven't even in our episode reviews for the Emotions Corner or my solo reviews in Google Docs. So let's delve into the Sodor half of Series 22, shall we? The Steam team received a great shakeup with Edward's departure in Series 21, and in this series, we have Henry's departure. And there was no fanfare for the latter whatsoever, with Forever and Ever treating it like an afterthought. At least Edward had a full episode to excuse his departure. Henry got 2 lines, and that was it. That really says a lot as to how he'd been treated since 1945, doesn't it? So who takes over the berths at Tidmouth Sheds? Enter Nia the Kenyan Tank Engine and Rebecca the Yellow Engine. I'll start with Nia since she was introduced in the movie, and to anyone who hates her because she's from Kenya, just fuck off with that racist attitude. And if I had to read one more YouTube comment complaining that she replaced Edward, I swear I will disable comments altogether. Though no doubt people will do it anyway. Please, I really don't want to do so because of a few racist assholes, okay? If you ask me, Big World Big Adventures the movie was Nia's high point as a character. Sassy, feisty, quick-witted, and clever, it was a bit of a shame looking back that her personality had been reduced to just kind and helpful. Ironically, the same box that Edward was taken out of. That's not to say her roles in Series 22 were bad. She was empathetic to Gordon's plight in Forever and Ever, despite him being dismissive of her, more on that later. And she was shown to have struggles in greedy numbers in Counting on Nia, showing kids that there were different ways to learn rather than depending on a flawed, rigid syllabus. It's also very relatable to immigrants moving to another country. That being said, it's pretty funny that fans are accusing the episode for dumbing things down in a preschool show for little kids who are probably learning their numbers for the engines, most of whom have numbers painted on their sides. Of the pair, I like Rebecca better. Not to say that I don't like Nia, I still consider her in my top 10 favorites, mind you, but I just feel Rebecca is a tad stronger in terms of personality. She's a precious cinnamon roll that deserves protection at all costs. I thought both of her leading roles were really good, although what Rebecca does has lost a bit of its shine since we first reviewed it, but still a good episode nonetheless. And they showcase what Rebecca was like as a character really well. She has insecurities, yet she still loves to see the good in everyone, even someone as tricky as Diesel, which can sometimes lead to her coming off as gullible. But in the end, she's very honest and humble. It says a lot that Rebecca did more between 2018 and 2020 than Molly ever did since 2005. She even has a Scouse Liverpudlian accent provided by Rachel Miller, so it's nice that a bit of Liverpool is still part of the show. Of course, like Nia, Rebecca is an extremely divisive character because she replaced Henry on the Steam team, but from what I've seen, the division is probably not as strong as Nia's. According to Ian McHugh, Nia and Rebecca were brought into the Steam team to fix the gender imbalance at Tib of Sheds and diversify the show. Did it make a difference? Well, no, not really. If anything, it only served to shatter the already crumbling fanbase for good. Yes, it meant that Edward and Henry would no longer be poorly characterized, but at the same time, Thomas, Gordon, James, Percy, and Emily still maintained the archetypes established by Mattel since the takeover in 2013, though with Emily getting the bad end of the stick that would continue over the next two series. She didn't even get a lead role in Series 22, and most of her roles could have been taken over by anyone. Also, is Toby still part of the Steam team or not? He had a pair of starring roles in Series 23 and 24, and he's in the Engine Roll Call, yet he doesn't live at Tidmouth Sheds. It's a paradox for sure. And as for the gender imbalance, the problem wasn't really the lack of female characters in the show, especially given how many female characters had gotten great roles throughout the Brennan era. No, the problem was that there were far too many characters in the CGI series, and not enough time to give everyone room for development. They gave Rosie a revamp, and have done very little with her since. You know, in that promo of her with the Steam team, it made me wonder, was Rosie meant to live at Tidmouth Sheds? It seemed perfectly reasonable to me. She would have fit the main trio with Thomas and Percy far better than James for these reasons. She's a small engine, she's female, and she'd maintain the red-green-blue spectrum. It makes perfect sense for Rosie to live at Tidmouth in Edward's place. But of course, Series 21 lost 8 episodes, and with the introduction of Nia and Rebecca, Rosie was reassigned to Vicarstown with Henry, and that's also bursting with potential. Who knows what might have been done with Rosie, even in the revamp, and who else was birthed at Vicarstown Sheds in addition to Henry and Rosie?
The world may never know.
Speaking of which, let's talk about Forever and Ever, which is seen as one of Series 22's most controversial episodes, probably one of the most polarizing episodes of the entire era, which is saying something. Was it intended to be an Attack the Critics episode? No, I don't think so. It was written around 2016, 17, and there was probably no way the writers would have known about the inevitable backlash it would have gotten from the fandom. However, I do see Forever and Ever as a satirical approach towards some of the more immature fans. Keywords. Some fans. It's a perfect metaphor for how they acted while Series 17 to 21 aired. They got very picky and entitled over the most minor problems in the same way Gordon constantly ridiculed Edward for his age. And then Mattel changed up the format of the show and fans understandably got upset over it, much like Gordon getting upset over Henry and Edward leaving Tidmouth. And now that I'm thinking about it, many of us should have acknowledged what was being shown in Duncan the Grumpy Passenger and the way she does it. The writers were calling out to the fans to not act selfish and entitled, and then, when fans still didn't get the message, Mattel finally decided they would no longer listen to the fanbase, so here we are right now. That being said, despite Forever and Ever's intentions, all it did was further intensify the backlash towards the Big World Big Adventures era and Mattel in general, and it's not getting any smaller with All Engines Go. If anything, it's only gotten bigger.
Meanwhile...
Oh no.
What's wrong, Cam?
I'm not sure. I just got a chill running up my back and then I can sense that something is happening right now. And that's not a good thing.
You mean...
Oh yeah. I have a feeling that's not going to end well between Zack and you-know-who.
Another divisive episode among the fandom, though probably not as divisive as Forever and Ever, is Rosie is Red, a heartwarming story that's relatable to kids and adults. If fans are not too happy about the show introducing the concept of love to the target audience, then explain why you love a show that featured a woman kissing Percy. Again, why is it okay when one era does it, but not okay when another does it? Oh wait, I know why. It's because because there's an anti-Mattel pro-Allcroft bias going around in the fandom. I understand. But in all seriousness, Rosie is Red is an episode that shows why Thomas and Friends should be given the proper label of a kids show. Fans who try to insist otherwise are most likely insecure and have fragile egos. Yeah, that's probably the wrong thing for me to say, but it still had to be said in order to try and get it through their thick skulls. That's not to say every episode was bad. School of Duck was a real highlight that gave us a charming performance by Mark Morahan through Dexter the coach. Thomas's animal arc had a heartwarming message about helping those less fortunate than you, and Hunt the Truck was the best of Series 22, proving that Edward still had a place in the show despite being demoted. But then there was Apology Impossible. Between myself, Mike, Rachel, Cameron, and Matt, there are a lot of episodes that are pretty divisive between us. Apology Impossible is one of those exceptions. All 5 of us agree that it's awful, making James an outright bully to Philip for no reason, and a diesel box cab urging others to let James cross is not only wrong, but potentially dangerous, as if the episode was saying you should never stand up to your bullies. If you shouldn't do so when lives are at stake, when are you supposed to stand up to bullies? This is without question one of the worst episodes in the entire show's history, and considering that Apology Impossible is in the same series as An Engine of Many Colors, an episode where James actually felt remorse for his carelessness, just makes it even worse. Series 22 is very hard to find in the United States. It was going to be released on Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime Video, but because of the Nickelodeon deal, plans were cancelled. It did eventually stream on Netflix in 2020, but only in the United Kingdom and Germany. Amazon Prime would eventually stream it in November that same year, along with the rest of Series 19 to 24. And strangely, on both Amazon and Spotify, many episodes were released in audio format with an unknown narrator explaining what's happening in some scenes. Basically, think of it as a descriptive video service track that you find on several streaming services, like Netflix or Disney+. Overall, Series 22 was something alright. It wasn't as strong as 17 to 21, but it wasn't as painfully unwatchable like 13 to 16. It was very much middle of the road for me. It was an interesting experiment, but at the time, I think most of us could agree that everything was a lot better on Sodor, save for Apology Impossible. Hell, 9 episodes out of 10 on my personal favorites list came from Sodor alone. Most of the international episodes range from pretty decent to pretty terrible, and a lot of them felt like they could have taken place on Sodor and very little would change. Thomas constantly being shoved in your face didn't help either, getting all the lead roles plus Thomas's animal arc, bringing his total to 14. Had it not been for Thomas Goes to Bollywood and Apology Impossible coming out the way they did, I think Series 22 may have fared a little better, perhaps on par with Series 19 at least. But as it stands, it's the weakest series that Brender and Co. have worked on since starting out in 2013. Meanwhile, I should probably bring this up, but I feel that a lot of fans have set expectations way too high since the airing of Series 20, and with both Series 21 and 22, as well as the free post-treasure specials, I couldn't help but feel that they may be acting as if the show should outright revert to how it was during the 80s and 90s, and if you think the show should outright go back as far as possible to the Stone Age, well, you're quite foolish in thinking so. Back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, model making was becoming expensive, and CGI was cheaper to utilize. In recent times, however, that trend appears to be reversing, given how many YouTube channels are dedicated to model making themselves. I don't mean to sound condescending to anyone, but once you've had your childhood, that's it. You only get one childhood, so you better make the most of it while you still can. Thinking that Thomas and Friends should be like how it was during the 80s and 90s is almost like Star Wars fans who grew up with the original trilogy asking for the sequel trilogy to revisit that feeling of the originals. Long story short, guys, you must never set expectations too high for anything. The more you hype yourself up, the bigger the disappointment might be. If you got turned off from the newer content because of drastic changes, I get why, but it doesn't mean I agree with you. The reason I chose to continue is because there's only 2 series left to cover. Oh shit.
Uh-oh. Cam? Rach? Will help.
Oh, just a second, Brendan. Coming, Mike! I'm on it!
Yeah, sure. Guess I was right about before. I had a feeling this would happen sooner or later.
Alright viewers, we're on to the home stretch, and I somehow managed to escape from Matt's onslaught of rage, just barely, so hold on to your asses. To say that Series 22 divided the fanbase would be a massive understatement. Some decided to quit the show outright, while others gave the new format the benefit of the doubt and waited to see what Series 23 would bring. In October 2018, for the online video Why is Africa Important to Nia, we saw a glimpse of James with an updated CGI render, with changes such as handrails for his cabin tender, as well as rivets all over his body. Thomas, Gordon, Percy, and Emily were all given a similar treatment beginning with the Meet the Steam Team online videos, and even applied to Birdie and Bulgy beginning with Free the Roads, as well as their number plates as seen in the Railway series. Yet, strangely, Edward and Henry did not receive a similar treatment for some reason. Given that they've been around since the beginning, you would think that they have been given a more updated look. In a rare move, Series 23 aired early in the United States on Nickelodeon, beginning with The Other Big Engine and Grudge Match on May 18, 2019. New episodes would usually come out in pairs every 2 weeks up to December 30th, with the exception of Steam Team to the Rescue, making its American debut on Netflix. As has been tradition since Series 19, new episodes begin airing in the United Kingdom starting in September with Free the Roads. So how does Series 23 compare to Series 22? Well, there were some things it improved upon. For a start, the international episodes were actually focusing on telling a story, while Culture is more of a show-don't-tell deal. And a fair number of them were really good, some of which I call among the best episodes of the show, like Crowning Around and Wish You Were Here. The latter feels more relevant and relatable now that we're in a post-COVID world. There were some more middling episodes like Grudge Match, Too Loud Thomas, and I found Badukata to be the weakest out of Series 23's international stories. It honestly felt like nothing was happening for 7 minutes. Oh, and while I'm on the topic, Thomas Makes a Mistake has given a reputation as one of the worst episodes of the entire show, and personally, I don't really think it's that awful. Yes, the title is bland and the plot sounds like something out of a Miller era, however, it makes sense because Thomas is on a foreign railway, so he wouldn't know how things are run in India. Plus, rather than ignoring the same warning 3 times, he actually tried to fix his mistake, only to make a bigger mess. On top of that, in real life, adults have a hard time admitting when they fucked up, and that sounds rather topical, isn't it? I've seen far worse, and I'd gladly take something like this over Apology Impossible any day. And not only did the international episodes focus more on telling a story, they even had some of Thomas's friends join him on his big world adventures. He was joined by the pack in Minds of Mystery, and there was even Monty ending up in Australia in Deep Trouble, and Percy in China in Wish You Were Here. Yeah, they were only in fantasy sequences, but hey, at least it was something. You might not have noticed it at this point, but Thomas went to 5 countries in Series 23, which is rather excessive. 3 episodes are set in Brazil, 2 episodes and 2 mini-specials in Italy, 2 episodes in India, and 1 episode each in China and Australia, with the remaining 11 episodes and 1 mini-special taking place on Sodor. Surprisingly, none of the Sodor-centric stories feature Thomas as the lead character. Steam Team to the Rescue comes close, but that was more of an ensemble story with the rest of the Steam Team, so that probably doesn't count either. Speaking of which, they had ditched the feature-length specials in favor of 3 mini-specials, which I think was a very good move because you could still tell bigger stories with a smaller runtime. In theory, at least. The mini-specials ran at 21 minutes and 30 seconds, 1 minute longer if you include the opening theme and end credits. This once again reduced the episode count to 20, counting the mini-specials, it's 23. They were directed by Joey So, while Diana Basso served as the consulting director for All Tracks Lead to Rome. And that brings me on to the Diggs and Discovery's duology. I said that brings me on to the Diggs and Discovery's duology. That brings me on to Diggs and Discoveries. Where the hell is Matt gone off to?
He's gone away to an anger management course again. After you trapped him in that closet, Zack, Mike's gone to aid him.
And a good thing too, because there is no way I am helping him with controlling his anger again. You guys remember what happened last time you left me with him in anger management, right? Been there, never doing that again.
Yes, Cam, we remember.
Are you kidding me? The one time I actually anticipate Matt interrupting me, knowing that he loves Gina in the Italy episodes, he's not actually here?
Yeah, that's more or less the case, bro.
Well, shit. Clearly I didn't think that through at all. The show must go on, I suppose.
Well, okay then. Guess me and Rachel shall leave you to it.
Anyway, the first half of the Diggs and Discoveries duology was All Tracks Lead to Rome, marking Gina's return since a pair of brief lines in The Great Race.
Everybody back on the ship! Is somebody missing?
After being voiced by Teresa Gallagher for 2016, though she sounded like Emily's UK voice with an Italian accent, Gina is now voiced by Anna Francolini, and she really brings the character to life by giving her some sass and refusal to take anyone's crap.
Oh, you are sweet, Thomas, not knowing these things. These are ancient archaeological discoveries for the museum. It's just a silly story about a curious engine who, a bit like someone else I know, kept turning up where he wasn't supposed to be. And here we are in Rome, Thomas, our capital city, the jewel in our crown. Some say all tracks lead to Rome. What? I only needed to be rescued because you got lost in the first place.
Gina really steals the show in both parts as well as whenever she turns up in the Italy episodes, and it's funny when she huffs and puffs.
I do not huff and puff.
It was right there that she took the top spot from Yang Bao as my favorite of the newbies from the Great Race. But it does make me wonder, why didn't she get stuck on Sodor instead of Ashima? I bet she'd have whipped Thomas's bunker into shape within minutes. The other newbie introduced in All Tracks Lead to Rome was Stefano the amphibious vehicle, and he's a bit of a large ham, the first part literally. Not much else to comment on here. Had he and Gina not turned out as great as they did in All Tracks Lead to Rome, as well as the climax, it would have come off as really boring as the story is pretty standard, so it relied on the strength of the characters to cover it up, and I think it did pretty well for the most part. Mainly, it served as a setup to the second half, Minds of Mystery. Now this is where the duology really shines. Seeing the pack interact with Gina was a lot of fun, and it further drove Thomas's desire to want to find the lost engine. And he did. Kevin was going to appear in the special, but for some reason he was dropped. It would have been nice to see him in a place outside of Sodor, but I can understand if they couldn't come up with a good role for him. Lorenzo and Beppe are a pretty fun duo as well. The former's impulsive, curious nature contrasts very nicely with the latter's more down-to-earth personality, but it's very hard to imagine one without the other. Vincenzo Nicoli must have had a lot of fun voicing both of them. Overall, Digs and Discoveries feels a bit like King of the Railway, but shorter and more focused. Finally, we come to Steam Team to the Rescue, which I thought was the weakest of the Series 23 mini-specials. It was very similar to the Big Freeze, only longer and even more riddled with plot holes. I mean, are we really expecting to believe that a railway as big as the Northwestern relies on the Steam Team and the Diesel crew? What about other engines like Edward, Henry, and Toby, who appeared during the first Don't Stop musical interlude? But on the other hand, this mini-special feels like an unintentional prediction for how the events of the COVID-19 pandemic would play out, so like Wish You Were Here, it does feel more poignant in hindsight. It's an okay mini-special with a great concept, but a half-baked execution. It's also the point where David Stoughton took over as head writer of the show following Andrew Brenner's departure in August 2018. However, there is one thing I think most fans can agree upon about Steam Team to the Rescue. It gave us the best song called Don't Stop since Fleetwood Mac.
Don't stop, keep on moving, steam's hot. It keeps us cruising, helping each other every day.
Man, is that catchy or what? No, is that... Okay then. Anyway, I wanted to mention them earlier while discussing the international stories, but I didn't want to disrupt the flow of this review. Now I can talk about Gustavo and Raul of Brazil. I quite like Gustavo the Electric Engine. He may be painted blue and have the number 4 on his sides like Gordon, but he's far friendlier and more laid back compared to his Cedrian counterpart. Just a shame that he starred in only one episode. I would have liked to see more of him, knowing that electric engines aren't common in this show. Raul was pretty good too, but like Gustavo, I wonder why he only starred in Grudge Match for Series 23. Gabriella appears in every episode, yet we know next to nothing about her as a character. With the other countries, Thomas at least had a proper introduction, or reintroduction in some cases, to them, but Brazil? He just shows up and I can't tell if the other Big Engine or Grudge Match is the start of his second time there. That always really bugged me. Oh, and for those who are wondering, here's how I would rank the international characters from the Great Race, at least those who actually had a chance to shine. Moving on back to Sodor with the pack and its two newest members, Brenda and Darcy. Of the two, I favor Brenda the Bulldozer. I know fans will go on about Byron not being reintroduced into CGI, but here's the thing. Mattel doesn't really care about the show's legacy, and in Minds of Mystery, Thomas did mention bulldozers, emphasis on the plural, so it wasn't like Byron was forgotten about altogether. And what's wrong with having two bulldozers? We got two dump trucks and two excavators, as well as two lorries, so why should Brenda be condemned for simply following a trend of having at least two of a particular type of construction vehicle? Darcy the tunnel boring machine, however, I don't really care for that much. Of her two appearances in this series, I favor Deep Trouble. First day on Sodor just wasn't that interesting. That's pretty much all I can say regarding Darcy, really. I did like that the pack got a fair amount of focus in Series 23, temporarily helping out in Italy and getting free episodes to themselves. I did think for a while that we'd get more out of him in Series 24, but nope. Ah well, at least we can be thankful for what we've got. The Sodor episodes were mostly solid in Series 22 with a couple of exceptions, but in Series 23, they're a bit more of a mixed bag. On the one hand, there are gems to be sure like Free the Roads, Diesel's Do Right, and Heart of Gold, Toby's best episodes in Series 1, but on the other, there were weaker episodes like Chuckleson Trucks, Diesel Glows Away, and Rangers of the Rails. The former felt like it put more emphasis on classic series references rather than focusing more on Rebecca and the trucks, and the latter simply felt mandated just to give Emily a lead role after not giving her one in Series 22. Diesel Glows Away was just there. And then there's Panicky Percy. This one was just a case of dead on arrival. If you thought the Little Green Engine's regression and Free Steam Engine's gruff was awful, then Panicky Percy's that, except 2 minutes shorter and way worse. I didn't think it was possible, but it beats out Apology Impossible for how awful it is. That episode could have been great with a couple of tweaks. Panicky Percy would need a rewrite from the ground up just to make it work. It's his worst leading role since Middle Engine, easily in my top 5 worst episodes of the show. For both Minds of Mystery and First Day on Sodor, the fantasy sequences gave off references to Indiana Jones and Terminator, respectively. Kids probably wouldn't know much about them, especially not the latter given its R rating, but I don't mind them that much. They are franchises that had origins in the 1980s, and Thomas and Friends is a TV show started in that decade. The same thing applies to a reference to Back to the Future in Thomas and the Inventor's Workshop next series. My guess is that there was something of an 80s renaissance following the success of Stranger Things, and it's possible that Thomas, being an 80s show itself, wanted to follow that trend. This review was a bit shorter compared to the previous few, but I guess there wasn't a whole lot to say about Series 23. While Series 22 had mostly strong Sodor stories and mostly hit-or-miss international ones, Series 23 seemed to sort of reverse that trend, with the latter on par with the former, even surpassing it at points. Had it not been for Panicky Percy, then both sets would be more or less on equal footing. It really did feel like the writers were starting to get into the groove of things in the new format, so maybe Andrew Brenner's departure was something of a blessing in disguise for the writing team. But for now, we're approaching the end of the line for the main show itself.
And I'm finally back.
Well, it's about time you showed up.
Hey, it was no thanks to you in the first place. If you hadn't knocked me out and then locked me in that closet, I wouldn't have gone berserk and tried to beat you up.
Well, if you didn't constantly interrupt me every time I tried to talk about the show, I wouldn't have knocked you out and locked you in that closet.
Well, whatever. Since we're in Series 23, I can finally start talking about the beautiful Gina.
Sorry, Matt, but I think Zack already finished the review.
You're kidding, right?
No.
Mike, how about we watch some Shining Time Station while these guys, figure things out?
Sure thing, Rachel.
"23 down, just one more series to go, folks. Let's do this." In 2019, it was confirmed by Jamfield Productions that they would no longer be animating for Thomas and Friends following Series 24, which left a lot of fans wondering, was the show being cancelled altogether, or was it going on hiatus so Mattel could find a new animation company? At the time, we didn't know if there would be a Series 25, but let's just say there's a reason I'm ending this marathon with Series 24, unless they somehow decide to revert to using CGI again. Though it's very likely that even if they did, by that point, I'll have retired from doing reviews on Thomas, lost interest in doing so altogether, or YouTube gets taken over by another internet overlord. Hey, anything could happen. You know, it seemed like yesterday when a lot of us thought that 2016 would be one of the worst years in modern human history since 1968.
You serious?
Oh boy. Yeah, 2016's not looking so bad now, is it? I probably don't need to say it, but 2020 was a complete shit show of a year. I'm not the first person to say that 2020 was the worst year in human history, nor will I be the last to say it. Obviously, there's the COVID-19 pandemic, which doesn't seem to be going away for a while yet, but then we've also got the death of Black Panther, President Biff barely doing his job at all, the George Floyd protests, people getting angry with each other over their beliefs, and even more exposing themselves as awful people, cancel culture getting out of hand over the most minor things, Alex Trebek ending up in an eternal hell of Sean Connery, the mere existence of pony life. The list goes on and on. Some even went as far as to say that 2020 was
the end of the fucking world.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And it was no better for the Thomas fandom at all. 2020 marked the 75th anniversary of the franchise. While it did have some good things about it, on the whole, it was a very underwhelming celebratory year for Thomas and Friends. The 50th anniversary had a book to celebrate the occasion, as well as Series 4 and a documentary. The 60th anniversary had Calling All Engines along with Series 9, and probably a couple of things I'm forgetting. Even the 65th anniversary had Series 13 and 14, as well as Misty Island Rescue. And when I say anything about the 65th anniversary being a better year for Thomas, you know that's a bad sign. And as for the 70th anniversary, I wouldn't even know where to begin. So what did the 75th anniversary have to offer? We did get a 22-minute love letter known as Thomas and the Royal Engine, and Series 24, one that's merely good, but it still doesn't compare to Series 21 or even Series 2. There was the 20th anniversary Blu-ray release of Thomas and the Magic Railroad, which I'll save my thoughts on that movie for another day. And of course, there's the death of Michelangelis, one of the worst cases of party pooping since 1989. So yeah, this is kind of a sad way to end this marathon. Not on a bang, but a bit of a whimper. For Series 24, the BWBA Adventures format seemed to have loosened its grip. For example, there's a reduction in fantasy sequences, allowing more room for storytelling, which honestly took me by surprise, but also a relief, as having a fantasy sequence in every episode can get tedious after a while. If we count the 22-minute episodes, 13 out of the 23 episodes for this season did not include a fantasy sequence whatsoever. Another noteworthy change was that there was no longer an even split between Sodor stories and international stories. There were only 5 episodes taking place away from Sodor, 1 per country with Brazil, India, Italy, Australia, and China. The last of them, Young Bao and the Tiger, was adapted from a China-exclusive short of the same name attached to The Great Race, and it pretty much ended the international episodes on a high note, even going full circle with them. After all, the first episode away from Sodor took place in China. Murcia and Marcio, the Brazilian tender engines, make their sole appearance in Thomas and the Forest Engines. They're not characters I would call top favorites, but they are Bash and Dash done better for sure. They've longed to go beyond the Eucalyptus Railway, but limited resources show why they were better off at home. Here's a great lesson that I don't think the show has ever taught before. It's good to try new things, but don't feel ashamed if you're more comfortable at home. If there was an international episode that I would say was bad, it's Ace's Brave Jump. Thomas and Ace, after departing on sour terms in Big World Big Adventures, are suddenly chumming with each other once again with no explanation. Like, did I miss something from Series 22? Imagine if Starlight Glimmer made her grand return after the Cutie map, and all of a sudden, she's part of Twilight Sparkle's friendship circle as opposed to them. Say what you will about the Cutie remark, but at least we actually saw her become friends again with the main 6. And speaking of redemptions, let's move on to Marvelous Machinery. I'm not gonna lie, it was a pretty boring duology overall. A new arrival just served as a setup to World of Tomorrow. Just about nothing happened save for Sunny's subplot. More on that in a bit. It also introduces us to Roof. No, not the Scarlowy railway coach. This Roof was a human inventor. Roof's positive attitude is something to be appreciated. When Thomas and the Inventor's Workshop was accidentally leaked in March 2020 along with James the Super Engine, your guess is as good as mine as to how that happened. She didn't leave much of an impression, but it was during the Cleo episodes where Roof really shone as a character by making her a motherly figure to the Road Engine. Cleo is such an adorable character, but it's pretty laughable that fans say her design is unrealistic, yet Diesel 10 is so lauded. But of course, anything by Mattel is devil incarnate despite the fact that they produce some of the best content since 1995. Okay, I don't think fans are outright saying that, but going by some attitudes, you'd be easily forgiven for thinking that. Anyway, back to Marvelous Machinery, and on to the second half, World of Tomorrow. It was the better of the two halves, but not by a whole lot. And Sonny's character arc really shone there, especially given that it's a redemption arc done right. Take notes, Hasbro. Rather than having everybody forgive him because the ending demands it, a few engines like Thomas are willing to accept him, while everyone else like Gordon thinks Sonny may be up to no good, despite that he is no longer being abused and controlled by Baz and Bernie. Sonny was never cruel of his own volition, he just wanted to be really useful. Unfortunately, I have little to say regarding Kenji the Bullet Train. He was very much a plot device for the climactic chase scene, and his sole leading role, Kenji on the Rails Again, didn't do him a whole lot of justice either. In fact, Kenji ends up on a ship with Hiro back to Japan, and that's it. If you thought Henry's departure from Tidmouth in Forever and Ever was rushed, this is that, only amplified, and it makes you wonder why on earth it took Hiro 9 series before he finally decided to return home again. So yeah, on the whole, Marvelous Machinery was a boring mess with unbalanced focus. That being said, this is probably one of the highlights from the duology.
I would say, oh, the indignity, but it seems a bit of an understatement.
Yeah, that moment is really funny, isn't it? And now we come to the series finale, Thomas and the Royal Engine. Yes, I know that it aired first in May 2020, while the rest started airing in September that same year, but chronologically, it is the final episode of the series as we knew it since 1984, so there. Anyway, they couldn't have picked a better way to bring the show to a close. This is 75 years in the making, not some childish reboot that tries and fails to claim that title. The story is very wholesome and simple, much like the franchise itself, and it teaches a great lesson in helping others in need. I don't know what else I can say that hasn't been said already. Thomas and the Rail Engine is that great. Also, having Sharon Miller voice the Queen of England herself feels like a massive take back towards the fans who hated on her for a decade. Whoever came up with that is an evil genius and I love him for it. Speaking of the royal family, we got an introduction sequence featuring Harry, Duke of Sussex. Bernalcroft herself criticized the marketing behind it, which I don't get at all. It also seems a bit ironic since she adapted the story that featured the Queen herself. Since Harry's family was familiar with the books, it seemed perfectly reasonable to me that they went that direction, as opposed to simply picking some random celebrity to introduce the story. And I really like Duchess of Loughborough during her sole appearance in the show. In case you're wondering, no member of the coronation's ever bore that name, so it's very likely that she's a fictional member of her class, which would explain her cream livery and red wheels and different smoke deflectors in Tender. Duchess is very down to earth for someone who has a big responsibility taking the royal train, and also makes her a bit scatterbrained as a result. She's a lot like celebrities in real life, far from perfect, and very no different from ordinary people like you or me. For the first time since her debut in 2003, Emily finally gained the number 12 on her tender in Emily to the Rescue, and the way they pulled it off was completely underwhelming. Did I want Emily to gain a number? Yes. So what was the problem with it? The story was a complete mess. A safety inspection takes place, then an emergency drill takes place, and James, Percy, and Rebecca crash while racing to get Rocky, so Emily is sent to pick him up instead. Meanwhile, a road bridge is on the verge of collapse, and Gordon nearly gets into an accident, but then Emily and Rocky save the day, and she's made the official safety engine and the number 12 is painted on her tender. Were you following all of this? This is a random events plot in which barely anything feels connected, and Emily getting her number at the end just feels tacked on with no proper build-up or foreshadowing. Was it worth it for the sloppy storytelling that got her there? No. If anything, it makes you wonder why Emily didn't get a number from the get-go. On top of that, why is Emily already the safety engine when you already had Belle? In fact, Belle even had a role this season in the Unfriendly Elephant, which aired 2 episodes later. It makes Emily the official safety engine simply redundant in every sense, even more so since many other engines have taken Rocky in the past. So what's the point in making Emily the only engine allowed to take him to emergencies? Emily to the Rescue is not her worst episode. It's much better than Emily's Best Friend, but not by much. But it is by far her most disappointing, as it could have been so much more. Instead, it felt like a half-assed attempt to give her a proper role in the show, but too little too late now that All Engines Go is focusing solely on Thomas and the smaller engines. They should have gone back to the writing board on this episode and given Emily a proper send-off rather than treating it all like an afterthought. It's like Henry's rebuild into Flying Kipper coming from nowhere. So in a sense, it looks as though we've gone full circle. So how does the final series of the show as we knew it since 1984 hold up? Well, it's pretty good overall, easily the strongest of the Big World Big Adventures era. I mean, there is no episode I rank worse than Apology Impossible or Panicky Percy, but at the same time, it's also frustrating and kind of sad because after all the crap that Series 21 had to endure just to get this era off the ground, and just as it was finding its footing, Mattel decides to bin it all in favor of a pointless reboot that no one wanted or asked for, rather than actually worrying about getting their stock into stores. As for me, I have no interest in talking about All Engines Go. I'm not even gonna watch it. So who knows what Stoughton and Co. might have come up with had the format been allowed to continue? Could we have seen Thomas ending up in new countries like Germany, France, and Japan? Feel free to leave your ideas in the comments below, and I'd love to hear them so long as they are not comments like "Bubba ruined Thomas." I swear if I see another comment like that again... So yeah, Series 24 is one that's frustratingly good, and it leaves you wondering what might have been had All Engines Go not taken place. Before I give my final thoughts on the Big World Big Adventures era, let's take a look back at the previous 4 eras and see how this era ranks among them. The classic era I found to be pretty good, but far from perfect. The hit model era was a big step down, starting off decently but then bottomed out with a transitional series that's aged pretty horribly. The less said about the Nitrogen era, the better. And the Burner era was very much on par with the classic era, even surpassing it at points. So where does the Big World Big Adventures era rank? Somewhere in the middle. Not the greatest thing ever, but when it's good, it's really good. I know that there are a lot of people out there who treat it like dirt, but I have a suggestion for you, however blunt I may come off as. Rather than getting all hung up over that era supposedly not being Thomas, just accept that it happened and move on. If you could do so for series 13 to 16, why not do so for 22 to 24 as well? Something that we always take for granted is that a lot of people poured their hearts into making these episodes, both good and bad. We shouldn't just live our lives by Thomas Tank Engine as if he's the only thing that truly matters. And I know you're probably sick of hearing it, but it's a show aimed at children under the age of 6. Always has been, always will be. Lest we forget, Audrey wrote the first stories based around Thomas and his friends to his son back when he was a toddler as bedtime stories. And if you don't like it when Thomas is described as a kid's show, that's on you for getting upset over it. If today's kids like any part of series 22 to 24, and the lessons they gain from it are not harmful in any way, though frankly, Apology Impossible and Panicky Percy should be avoided at all costs, then that should be all that matters, and that's good enough for me. But how will the Big World Big Adventures era fare by 2025 for the franchise's 80th anniversary, if it's still around at all? Ask me again in a few years. But for now, as has become tradition by this point, here's my personal top 10 favorite episodes from that era, some of which I consider on par with both the classic and Brenner eras. Number 10, School of Duck. Number 9, Diesel Do Right. Number 8, Confusion Without Delay. Number 7, Sunny Second Chance. Number 6, Wish You Were Here. Number 5, Rosie is Red. Number 4, Hunt the Truck. Number 3, Young Bao and the Tiger. Number 2, Heart of Gold. And number 1, Thomas and the Royal Engine. And of course, here's my personal top 10 least favorites, so as a minor spoiler, don't be surprised by some of the episodes I chose for this list. Number 10, Barukata. Number 9, Emily to the Rescue. Number 8, Seeing is Believing. Number 7, A New Arrival. Number 6, Emily's Best Friend. Number 5, Thomas in the Wild. Number 4, Thomas in the Monkey Palace. Number 3, Thomas Goes to Bollywood. Number 2, Apology Impossible. And number 1, Panicky Percy. Alright, so this concludes Sodorama, at least for the main series. Have I been critical at times when it came to my reviews? In fairness, I may have been unjustifiably harsh at certain points, but as a critic, I value honesty over anything else. If you agree or disagree with anything I've said in this 24-part review series, that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, and most of my opinions when it came to certain episodes boil down to caring about the story rather than the visuals and the music. That's one of the reasons why I don't like the Flying Kipper as much as I used to as a kid. It's an episode I call spectacle over substance, but I do try to be as fair as possible when it comes to reviewing the show, which I cannot say for Thomas's handler since the 1980s. I think that if there was a recurring theme throughout the show's run, it's that the treatment of Thomas and Friends as a show, brand, and franchise has been atrocious. Britt Allcroft, as well-meaning as she was, is very much responsible for the mess that Thomas is in right now. Wilbur Audrey put his faith in an Icarus to handle his creation. It began when Britt introduced Thomas to American American audiences through Shining Time Station, and starting with Series 3, she ended up catering too much to the American audience. That's also part of the reason why Rusty to the Rescue exists, because Britt apparently thought that kids from the 90s wouldn't understand anything about British culture. Then Audrey died and Britt took too much control of Series 5, and it was only when Thomas and the Magic Railroad bombed at the box office that she had flown too close to the sun and drowned in her biggest failure, resulting in her selling the rights to Hit Entertainment. 20 years later, Mattel effectively finished the job Britt Allcross started by creating All Engines Go. This cynical attitude and misunderstanding towards Audrey's creation has hardly changed in the past 30 years or so. As for what the future holds for Thomas and Friends, we have no idea. But at the moment, even when the fanbase acts entitled at its worst, at their best, they can create stories that emulate the feeling of the Railway series, the Classic Era, the Brenner Era, or a combination of all three. So while the true legacy of Thomas will live on in fan projects, I'll leave a few examples below, of course, no one can truly replicate Wilbur Audrey's writing style or David Mitten's directing skills. Not even Andrew Brenner, Ian McHugh, Diana Basso, and Michael White. But doesn't mean we can't try. Even if All Engines Go flops hard with critics and fans, I do not believe it'll be the worst thing that Mattel has done. Far from it, in fact. They've done far more scandalous things like lying about their stock and sales, supporting Autism Speaks, and more recently, abusing members of the Thomas Creator Collective, many of whom have since gone on to make far better fan productions. A lot of stories that some of those people have told were really fucked up, believe me. Seriously, if those behaviors are not enough to make you hate Mattel, then I don't know what will. Most companies do shady things solely for money, no matter how much it may end up hurting people, directly or indirectly. With all that said, you have to wonder what might have happened had Britt Allcroft not let Thomas's popularity get the better of her and she started to make stupid decisions, again being the indirect cause for Mattel's meddling of Thomas and Friends. But as much as I hate to say it, what's happened has happened. The original show was a good run while it lasted. 36 years is a very commendable run if I do say so myself. If they have an online presence, I recommend following the creators to see what they've been up to outside of Thomas and Friends. Whether or not you think their contributions to the show were good or bad is irrelevant. There is, after all, more to them than simply writing, producing, or doing voice work for the Little Blue Tank Engine and his friends. Maybe ask a few questions if you're interested, but please don't make them all about Thomas. I cannot stress that enough. My name is Zack Wanzer, you've been watching Sodorama, and I'll see you next time when we return to the Emotions Corner. But depending on what crops up, don't expect our next project to be a Thomas-related review. That's not to say we won't revisit the Little Bluey 2 and his friends on occasion, but there are other topics we'd like to discuss as well. To give off one final hurrah to Thomas and Friends as we know it, here's Headmaster Hastings with a song dedicated to Sodor.
Picture a land where the sky is so blue, storybook land of wonder, magical island just waiting for you. Island of Sodor will make your dreams come true. Imagine a place where the sun always smiles, the valleys are green as can be. The friends that you love are waiting for you. Island of Sodor, make your dreams come true. Children, follow the dream to a land of make-believe. The island of Sodor, magical land where dreams come true. Follow the road that leads to your dream, over the hills and mountains. Look for the skies with stars in their eyes. Island of Sodor will make your dreams come true. Children, follow the dream to a land of make-believe.
the sea, through the oceans of time, there's a place I'd really love to reside, full of talking trains with faces in the depths